Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and I'd like to do something unique today. The anniversary for Ted Kennedy's death is coming up on August 25th, and I'm dovetailing it with a video that Glenn Greenwald has done recently about nuclear danger. Okay, and I like doing things that are a little unconventional, for these videos. So let's try this kind of thought that I have here. So Ted Kennedy obviously is the younger brother of the two more famous Kennedys, John F.K. and RFK. And John F.K. and RFK were the ones that had to navigate, truly navigate, and you'll understand why I use the word navigate, through the crisis of the Cuban Missile issue, right? With Cuba and Russia and all this nuclear proliferation. And we were at the edge of the abyss and nuclear annihilation if certain things weren't calmed down. Thankfully, things were calmed down. And then obviously, John F. Kennedy was assassinated in '63, and shortly after that, RFK is assassinated in '68. So there's something to be learned from Ted Kennedy, even though he was not in the room during the Cuban Missile Crisis. But Ted Kennedy, because of his tenure in the Senate for, close to 50 years or so, has seen a huge arc of the country, going from the early 60s all the way to when he died in 2009. And that transition, the civil rights era, the era of Carter, the era of Nixon, the era of Reagan, the era of the Bushes, the era of Clinton, and then that transition to Obama. Now, people that listen to this channel, most of them are probably Republican or conservative, but I think there's something to be learned from Ted Kennedy, even though he was a liberal. He wasn't an ultra liberal like AOC, but he's a liberal, and I do think that the things that he says does have that hint of God, country, and family. I just recently finished his audiobook. It was the last book that he did. It's called True Compass, and talks about the North Star, and that's your true compass, and navigating through life and all these tumultuous things that have happened to him, that shook him to the core, and a lot of them he caused, right? But throughout his book, it is amazing the life that he lived and the funny things that happened along his 77 years of existence. He died at age 77. He died from brain cancer, and now if he had the same cancer, it might have been more treatable. And he was a supporter for cancer research. He was a supporter for healthcare for all, and he goes back and forth on the things that he could agree with certain presidents and disagree with others, and that was on both sides. That was on the Democratic side and on the Republican presidents. But there was something to be learned from him. Now, I'm an intuitive type person, all right? And I think that the world is unraveling and there's some bad things that are happening. And I keep on getting the feeling that we have to learn from the past, and I'm not talking ancient, you know, ancient Egypt or or Rome. When I mean the past, like the last, maybe 60, 70 years in the American history, right? And I think that's something about the Truman era. We just went through another anniversary with the Hiroshima. What's coming up is Nagasaki, and that era of Truman dropping the bomb and the change of the world and all that has transpired since. And a lot has transpired since. Some good, some bad. You know, there's a curse and a blessing, like I've been saying. But there's a foundation of God, country, and family. And because Ted Kennedy was such a lover of the sea and of sailing, right? You can see that he's wrapping his thoughts and his philosophies with the water and with the stars at night in the open ocean, and the waves crashing. Everything is New England coastal talk, but there is this element of nature, battling nature, but also using nature as a comfort, like a blanket of comfort. And he went out to the sea during these tumultuous times, when his brothers were killed, or a lot has happened in that family, and it's amazing that he was the standing bearer for all of this activity. He had to quote, give away certain family members for weddings, right? Because some of the the fathers weren't there because they were killed. uh, the the issues that he had with his children, the scandals and Chappaquiddick, and all these things that have happened. And I'll bring up my sense of what happened with Chappaquiddick. But there, even though you may think that there was something negative about Ted Kennedy, and there probably is a lot of negative, there's something to be learned from this era. And not just the era, this arc. See, John F. K didn't have that arc, nor did RFK have that arc. They were very laser pointed into a very small time frame, for American presidency history, right? It's that early 60s. But Ted Kennedy, he arced the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, 2000, almost to 2010. He's more of a presence. There's something, and because he was a major senator, right? He talks about this, and he spent a lot of time learning about the Senate. He embraced the Senate. He learned its function and the inner workings. And he talks about the inner core and the outer core of the Senate. And as an early senator, he was in the outside. But over time, he became an inside Senate. And through that inside Senate, that's where all the wheeling and dealing happens. And that's where the legislation moves the country forward or slows it down, depending on what is going on in that particular era's politics and the president and all this. He talks about how certain things were resisted even during the Bush administration, Bush Senior's administration, and his conflict even with Carter on certain things, because Carter, according to Kennedy, Carter was afraid of Kennedy. So, but there's something to be learned here. And like I said with on a different video, that 322, the number 322 is August 24th, going all the way to October 7th. So the incident of October 7th last year, you go 32 days out, you get to August 24th, 2024. And then the burial, or the death, I should say, of Ted Kennedy, which was August 25th of 2009. There's something to be learned here. My sense, my intuitive sense, is saying that there's something to be learned from this. Maybe something specific to American foreign policy. Maybe it has something to do with the philosophy of the water and sailing. Maybe it's the idea of trials and tribulations and going through one's faults. I don't know, but there's something to be learned. So I listened to the audiobook, and I just finished it last night. And there's a lot of funny parts to it, like him riding a Bronco, to get votes in Nebraska for his brother, because he was on the he was helping with the campaign for his brother for presidency. So, there is a lot of funny moments, but there's also a lot of tragedy, obviously. A lot of people know about, quote, the curse of the Kennedys and all this. And, is there a curse? Who knows? I mean, John Hogue thinks that there is a curse relative to a rabbi that cursed the father when he was an ambassador to England just before the war. I don't know, but there's something to be learned about God, country, and family service. And I think, but there's also people's failings, people's faults, and learning from them. You see the whole arc of life with Ted Kennedy. You don't see the full arc of life with RFK or JFK. They're more lasered. They're frozen in time. I kind of sense that with my brother who died. He's frozen in time. And there is no older brother. He's a 36-year-old that's frozen in time. It's a strange feeling. Ted Kennedy also talks about this, the loss of his brothers. Now, there was a forceful loss, in his case. But the loss that I had with my brother was, because of health issues. But there's something to be learned here. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm just going through my intuition here. And there's a lot of conflict in the world now. And I did a video about this. The strategic deterrence experts of that era, of the 60s and 70s era, to try to bring the Cold War to an end, have died. That's Brzezinski. That's Kissinger. Kissinger was the major one. So, we don't really have someone that has had a foot in the era as it was developing. And now we have kind of lost that history. And I think this is part of the reason why something is telling me, pay attention to the 60s, pay attention to the 70s, pay attention to the 80s. Something is to be learned here, because something bad is coming. All right, so I've been given some dates to people. The 322 date, which is August 24th of this year, is a worrisome date that I have. Another worrisome date that I'm concerned about is September 24th of this year. I don't know why, I keep on saying it. September 24th, 2024. It's blue. It's dealing with New York. Looks like it's dealing with the UN, and it's dealing with some sort of major event. Don't know what it means. But, there's something to be learned here, because we have individuals in the society that have forgotten our history. We have leaders leading these different countries, including ours in the United States, that have lost history. They're not as intelligent. I just saw an article just recently. The average intelligence, based on a published paper in 2022, the average intelligence in the United States is 98. 98. I believe Hong Kong was 106 or 109. That is unacceptable. That's below average intelligence by 2 points. Canada is 1 point above the United States at 99. Below average intelligence in the United States. That means that out of the subset of users on X, which aren't just Americans, but a lot of them are Americans, the subset of X users, if you randomly pick them, the average IQ of people on X will be 98, below average intelligence. There is something wrong with our society. And another thing to learn from Ted Kennedy, is the eloquence, the words he uses. And he talks about in his book how, because he was the younger child, and Joseph Kennedy was always traveling around because he was an ambassador and all this, that he could never be in one place for school. So he was constantly moving around, especially in third grade. So those formative years for learning were disrupted, and he didn't do well in school. He did actually poor in school. And then, there were tutors, and then boarding school, and private school type stuff that he was put into, and it improved. He improved. Then he gets into Harvard. And because he didn't do well early on in high school, and there was a little bit of a behavioral issue there too, that his language skills for a foreign language was subpar in Spanish. And he was a football player. He was concerned about losing his position on the football team because of grades. And he eventually had a friend to take the test, and they got caught, and he was kicked out. He eventually was let back in after serving in the Army. So, and he did 2 years of service. It was supposed to be for 4 years, and he wanted, according to the book, he wanted to go to the Korean War, because this is during the Korean War time. And his brothers decided to convince him not to go into the Korean War, sign up for the Korean War, because of their older brother dying in World War II, and JFK, having the incident with the PT-109. And there was already kind of like the curse is starting, with the family, and they just didn't want to put the stress on the parents. So he was convinced by his older brothers not to go into the Korean War. And then his father, because of his connections, was able to shorten his service in Europe. And he ended up going back to Harvard and then finishing his Harvard degree. And supposedly when he retook Spanish, I think he said he got an A minus. So, but the thing is that there is this self-determination of trying to improve yourself, even with your faults, and changing course, going through a storm, trying to navigate through that storm, and eventually having perseverance to be able to get the conditions set for you to be able to keep on going on your journey. That's a big lesson to be learned. There's a lot. I mean, it's amazing that the life that he lived, there's tragedy, but there's also comedy all wrapped up into it. And it's funny, you know, it's also sad, but it's also funny too at the same time. And I didn't know any, I had no idea that this person had this kind of life because the media only focuses on a certain sliver of it, the Chappaquiddick incident, or um, you know, this family of power and wealth. But there was a lot more to it. You know, he felt alone because there was such a an age difference between his older brothers and him, and then the tragedy with his sisters. You know, so these things helped him navigate through life, but also questioned, you know, what he should do or shouldn't do. You know, there was deliberation in his thoughts early on that kind of made him a perfect senator. But he wouldn't see that. He wouldn't have been. I don't think he would have been a good president. And he didn't make it as president. He ran for president. He didn't make it. He couldn't get enough of a voting base during the primaries. But there is a sense of the deliberation gene turned on when he was younger, and he didn't even realize it was happening. But when you see the full arc of his life, you see it. There's something to be learned about Ted Kennedy and the crisis that we're in this world. Even though I'm against his policies, I'm against liberalism, you know. But there's something to be learned from him. The rhetoric, the oratory, the writings, the thinking. This is something that Americans have lost. And unfortunately, if Americans don't pick up and start going to the foundations, just like Ted Kennedy was talking about, he used different words, but he's meaning the same thing: God, country, and family. If you don't go to those and you don't improve yourself physically and mentally, we're not going to have a prosperous nation. And it is unacceptable for Americans to be below average intelligence. The average American is 98. Why is that? Doing poor in school, focused on sports, you know, and it's not focusing so much on sports and being athletic, but focusing on sports and being just a consumer, watching it on TV. When I was a kid, we played outside. We didn't have video games and all this stuff until later on in life, until the 80s. But all through the 70s, everything was, it wasn't watching TV and video games and all that. It was playing outside. Baseball, football, soccer, you know, playing war in the woods, you know. There was activeness. We don't have that today. We don't have that today. Um, and now we have all the social media and video games, and no one's reading, no one's writing. I wouldn't say no one, that's too general, but there are a lot of people, their writing and reading skills have declined. And I think this is becoming more common in Western developed countries. The Asian countries, their average intelligence is above 100. You know, we're talking about China and Hong Kong and, you know, Japan and all this. They're above, the average person is above average intelligence. The average person in the United States is below average intelligence. That's unacceptable. That's because of the rap and the inner city crime and the I don't care attitude. It's a loss of God, country, and family. Disrespecting of the flag, disrespecting of the Oval Office, disrespecting of, you know, of government. But there is a flip side to that. You also have government officials that are disrespecting the people. So when I say disrespecting of the office, it's a lot of times not just of the population disrespecting the office, but also the ones that are holding the office are disrespecting it. And they're not holding high reverence to it. It's an issue. It's an issue. And it devolves. Same thing. It's kind of like the broken window theory in the urban environment. If you have enough broken windows, the crime just starts going up. You stop the broken windows, you fix things up, people take pride of their environment, and crime goes down. If people disrespect office, either the ones that are holding it or the population, then it'll just spiral more out of control. But if you start having people that are in office respecting the office and having constituents that respect that office, then there's a positive feedback and society gets better. There's something to be learned here. Things are getting out of control. Ted Kennedy also talks about how when he's in the Senate, he didn't need that much staff. But as time went on, the staff started ballooning out. And you needed more and more staff members to help you with writing bills because these bills became larger and larger. So this ballooning out of an administrative state is a problem. But there's something to be learned here. There's something to be learned on how to improve your life, how to go through adversity, but also some of the tumultuous things that are going on geopolitically. Something to be learned here. Intuitively, it's telling me this. So this is part of the reason why it's dovetailing into Glenn Greenwald's video on nuclear disaster, right? Nuclear danger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play some videos on Kennedy, and then we're going to go to the video from Glenn Greenwald. But there's this concept of the North Star. And the North Star will lead you home, as he phrases it. You know, metaphysically and literally, you know. So with that said, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and help support my work. You can donate through Stripe, PayPal, or buy me a coffee on the homepage of my website. The link's in the description of this video. You can also be a paid member to my Patreon channel to help support my work. The link is in the description of this video. And please sign up and follow me on my 4 channels on YouTube, Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. Links are in the description of this video. So let's start with Kennedy talking about True Compass, his book.
I had a sit down with my dad. He said, "Now, Kenny, you have to make up your mind whether you want to have a constructive and positive attitude and influence on your time. And if you're not interested in a purposeful, useful, constructive life, I just want you to know I have other children that are out there that intend to have a purposeful and constructive life. And so you have to make up your mind about which direction you're going to go." I remember climbing into bed and staring at the ceiling for a good time, but the night hadn't been over when it was very clear to me what kind of life I wanted to lead. There's nothing surer than a North Star. It doesn't vary, it doesn't change. It's constant. The idea of a compass and following the directions of the compass and staying true to its direction makes sense to me. What I've tried to do in the United States Senate is to be true to the things which have been important in my life. My brother Jack arrived in Washington. That was around 1946, and he took me around the House of Representatives, and then he took me over to the Supreme Court. And his final comment as we were walking across the Capitol grounds, he said, "Look, Teddy, you've seen all the buildings that are important to this country. It isn't just the buildings itself, it's what happens inside." And I remember that a bit of advice my whole life, and still pretty good. I think at some time in your life, you have to recognize that there's an extraordinary opportunity to put down some thoughts that you have that are relevant to your service in the United States Senate. And that's what I've tried to do. I had the chance during this period of time to see these up close. The Vietnam War, civil rights, and certainly health insurance. With regards to the Iraq War, I think that you would have an entirely different world had we been able to stop that conflict. Well, I've never shied away from being called a liberal, but what I have done is stand up for my beliefs. In 1959, my brother Jack thought it was important that we have someone in the Western states. I went to Miles City, Montana. They were going to have a rodeo prior to the time that they were going to have a meeting with all of the delegates. I said, how do I?
Once in a while, you can see his hand shaking. This is dealing with the brain tumor that he has. He's being interviewed while he has cancer.
Introduced at the rodeo. So they said, you're Shorty's next, and you're up after Shorty. Just then, boom, out of the gate comes the horse. And right behind him is Shorty. And I look over there, and the Shorty lasts about 8 or 9 seconds. And then, boom, off Shorty goes in the air, and then he goes down on the ground there. And then I saw something which was one of the scariest things of my life. This horse did what they call a corkscrew. When the horse stays in one place, it keeps turning and turning and turning. And that is what happened to Shorty. And I looked out there, and Shorty had blood all over him. He was dusting himself off. And he said, now is your time. And so I ride Skyrocket, which I thought was rather ominous name. I lasted 6.5 seconds. Thank goodness I didn't have a horse that corkscrew. And there wasn't a person that didn't give me a standing ovation, and they all got a kick out of it. So did I. One of my favorite stories involved what I call Little Teddy. There's Big Teddy, which that's myself, and then Medium Teddy, and then Little Teddy. Little Teddy, in the very beginning, he didn't get much satisfaction, didn't like sailing. He had to bail out his boat, and he was always in trouble, and he didn't want to continue sailing. But as we took more and more time to go over the technique and the various kind of procedures on the boat, Little Teddy just got better and better and better. The start of August, middle of August, he began to win the races. And at the last race, he won the whole series. And by the end of the summer, he was eager to learn. When they gave the awards, he got the award for the most improved sailor. And that was a great moment. You couldn't even button up his coat because his chest was so filled with pride and achievement on that. And it was a great lesson, whether you were a child or whether you're a grown-up, that longer I live, the fact is, by persevering and sticking at it and working at it, you have a real opportunity to have an impact.
Okay, so that was that video. Now what I want to do is play I'm going to play the birds statement on the floor of the Senate.
Senator Ted Kennedy rose from the shadows of his famous brothers to become a stalwart in Congress and one of the most recognizable and influential.
No, this is just going to be the Associated Press mentioning that he dies.
Of his time.
It is wrong for the administration to beat the drums of war.
Edward M. Kennedy was the youngest of 9 children in what would become one of the most famous and powerful political families in American history. A graduate of Harvard and Virginia Law School, he cut his political teeth helping his older brother, John F. Kennedy, run for president in 1960. 2 years later, at the age of 30, he himself was elected to fill the Senate seat his brother had vacated. With that win, the Kennedy family had risen to the top of American politics, having one brother in the White House, another, Robert, as Attorney General, and Ted as a member of Congress. It's a post he would never leave, getting reelected 8 times. Although more prominent seats on the Senate floor became available, he never abandoned the desk his brother once occupied. Ted Kennedy helped the family carry on after his brother was assassinated in Texas in 1963. He was severely injured himself the next year when a plane he was in crashed, killing 2 other people on board. 4 years after that, his brother Robert was assassinated while running for president. The weight of the family fell solely on him.
My brother need not be idealized or enlarged in death beyond what he was in life. Be remembered simply as a good and decent man who saw wrong and tried to right it, saw suffering and tried to heal it, saw war and tried to stop it. Those of us who loved him and who take him to his rest today, pray that what he was to us, what he wished for others, will someday come to pass for all the world.
In 1969, Kennedy ran headlong into scandal. He drove his car off a bridge on Chappaquiddick Island in Massachusetts. While he was able to get out, the passenger in his car, Mary Jo Kopechne, died. Kennedy later pleaded guilty to leaving the scene of an accident and was given a suspended 2-month sentence.
Whether some awful curse did actually hang over all the Kennedys.
He deflected calls for him to run for the White House, instead building up his stature in the Senate, where he was fast becoming one of the most effective Democratic leaders. He did test the presidential waters in 1980 when he tried to wrest the nomination away from incumbent President Jimmy Carter. He won 10 primaries that year, but later bowed out of the race. He returned to the Senate, where he continued to gain power and served as the chairman of the Health and Education Committee. He also held seats on the powerful Armed Services Committee and the Judiciary Committee. However, tragedy wouldn't leave the family alone. He was again called on to help the country mourn, this time after the passing of his nephew, John F. Kennedy Jr. In 2006, Time magazine recognized him as one of America's 10 best senators, and stating that he had a record of legislation that affected the lives of nearly every single American. Kennedy returned to the presidential spotlight in 2008, but not as a candidate.
I have seen him in the Senate. He will keep us strong, defend the nation against real threats.
He announced his staunch support for fellow Senator Barack Obama. Later that year, he was diagnosed with a brain tumor. At the time of his passing, he was second only to Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia as the most senior member of the Senate. Ed Donahue, The Associated Press.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you.
Remembrances today for their father made reference to the sacrifices that are required when you hold public office.
And Joe Kennedy, when he spoke last night, made special reference to the sacrifices that those sons made as well. Not only did they have to share their father with the country, with the Senate, with the staff, but with all of their cousins, because he was the father, the patriarch of the family, with so many others. He had so many other responsibilities. Those eulogies by the sons, today were really, for me, the highlight of the day. We talked about it earlier, especially Ted Jr., who lost his leg to cancer at the age of 12, I think, maybe even a little bit younger, telling that story about his father wouldn't let him give up, was going to carry him up that hill where they were trying to sled if he had to, and to hear sort of the conviction and the vigor and the emotion and the love in his voice all at the same time was a testament to Ted Kennedy as a father.
The coffin now being taken to the site for burial. Ricky Kennedy and the family gathered. That flag, which has been on the coffin for the last few days, the flag that flew over the Senate the last day that it was in session. And as the service proceeds, those members of the military will hold it there, taut, between.
May I, for just a moment, be the voice of so many all around the world to pay a final tribute to Senator Ted Kennedy and to offer our heartfelt condolence to his wife Vicki, to his sister Jean, to his children and grandchildren, and to all the Kennedy family, as also to that extended family that must probably include most of America. May I also add a word that we who were privileged to watch the very beautiful funeral mass this morning had to be touched by the wonderful part in that liturgy played by the younger generation of Kennedys. The warm and very personal tribute in the elegies of Teddy's sons, and even that of the President of the United States, whose warmth and whose friendship for Ted is obviously so powerful. That, together with the splendid homily of Father Hessian, Ted's parish priest, made our farewell to Senator Kennedy unforgettable. On learning of his death last Wednesday morning, tributes to his half-century of leadership in American life and politics came from all over the globe. May I offer my own short one again? They called him the Lion of the Senate, and indeed, that is what he was. His roar and his zeal for what he believed made a difference in our nation's life. Sometimes, of course, we who were his friends and had great affection for him would get mad at him when he roared at what we believed was the wrong side of an issue. But we always knew and were always touched by his passion for the underdog, for the rights of working people, for better education, for adequate health care for every American. His legacy will surely place him among the dozen or so greats in the history of the Senate of the United States. Shortly before he died, Senator Kennedy wrote a very moving letter to the Holy Father and took advantage of the historic visit to the Vatican of President Obama to ask the president if he would deliver it personally, which Mr. Obama gladly did. A couple of weeks later, the Pope replied with a fatherly message of concern for the senator's illness and a prayer for his progress. When Vicki and I and others began to talk about the organization of this brief service, the happy thought emerged of using part of these two letters to commemorate the faith of Ted Kennedy and the warm and paternal spirit of Pope Benedict XVI. I want to quote from that letter. It begins, "Most Holy Father, I asked President Obama to personally hand-deliver this letter to you. As a man of deep faith himself, he understands how important my Roman Catholic faith is to me, and I am so deeply grateful to him. I hope this letter finds you in good health. I pray that you have all of God's blessings as you lead our church and inspire our world during these challenging times. I am writing with deep humility to ask that you pray for me as my own health declines. I was diagnosed with brain cancer more than a year ago, and although I continue treatment, the disease is taking its toll on me. I'm 77 years old and preparing for the next passage of life. I have been blessed to be part of a wonderful family, and both of my parents, particularly my mother, kept our Catholic faith at the center of our lives. That gift of faith has sustained and nurtured and provides solace to me in the darkest hours. I know that I have been an imperfect human being, but with the help of my faith, I have tried to right my path. I want you to know, Your Holiness, that in my nearly 50 years of elective office, I have done my best to champion the rights of the poor and open doors of economic opportunity. I've worked to welcome the immigrant, to fight discrimination, and expand access to health care and education. I've opposed the death penalty and fought to end war. Those are the issues that have motivated me and have been the focus of my work as a United States Senator. I also want you to know that even though I am ill, I am committed to do everything I can to achieve access to health care for everyone in my country. This has been the political cause of my life. I believe in a conscience protection for Catholics in the health field, and I'll continue to advocate for it as my colleagues in the Senate and I work to develop an overall national health policy that guarantees health care for everyone. I've always tried to be a faithful Catholic, Your Holiness, and though I have fallen short through human failings, I've never failed to believe and respect the fundamental teachings of my faith. I continue to pray for God's blessings on you and on our church, and would be most thankful for your prayers for me. 2 weeks later, the reply came back from the Vatican, and in part, it read as follows. The Holy Father has read the letter which you entrusted to President Obama, who kindly presented it to him during their recent meeting. He was saddened to know of your illness and asked me to assure you of his concern and his spiritual closeness. He is particularly grateful for your promise of prayers for him and for the needs of our universal church. His Holiness prays that in the days ahead, you may be sustained in faith and hope, and granted the precious grace of joyful surrender to the will of God, our merciful Father. He invokes upon you the consolation and peace promised by the risen Savior to all who share in his sufferings and trust in his promise of eternal life, commending you and the members of your family to the loving intervention of the Blessed Virgin Mary. The Holy Father cordially imparts his apostolic blessing as a pledge of wisdom, comfort, and strength in the Lord. That's the end of the quotation. With the prayers of our Holy Father, Pope Benedict, added to our own prayers, we entrust the body of Edward Moore Kennedy, Senator Ted, to his resting place until the Lord calls us forth, until the end of time. Amen.
And that is why you don't disrespect the flag. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the structural nanosilver gels and liquids that I offer. For the liquids, the structural nanosilver liquids, I have the structural nanosilver for the 30 ppm, the max 14 for the 14 ppm, and the max 35 for the 35 ppm. You take a teaspoon of this a day, you swish it in your mouth, you gargle with it, you swallow it. That'll neutralize pathogens and help to maintain the mucosal barrier. This way you are boosting up your immune system, you're preventing a pathogen from getting into that, into the epithelial lining. If you're not feeling well, take a tablespoon or 2 a day. With the structural nanosilver gel, I have 2 types, one in a dispenser and one in a tube form. You use it the same way. You put it on your hands. It'll stay active for 5 hours, neutralize pathogens. You can put it around your mouth, around your nose, around your eyes, around your ears, lightly coat your nostrils. You can't do that with Perel. But with structural nanosilver gel, you can. So please go to my store and get the structural nanosilver gel. It also will help to heal a wound, an abrasion, a minor burn, acne. You can use it as a skincare, everyday skincare. You put it on your skin. The best way to do that, if you're doing skincare, is put it on your skin, go to bed. When you wake up, exfoliate. You'll notice that your skin is clearer and tighter, especially around your face. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the structural nanosilver gels. Lastly, it's really important to improve your skin, your bones, your joints, your tendons, right? Your ligaments with collagen. All right. This collagen powder is a big scooper. You just take 1 scoop a day, and you can mix it with your food or with water or with a smoothie or whatever. It has a very nice amino acid profile, right? As you can see on the screen here. So this is a great collagen powder. Take it every day. You'll notice that your skin is improving and your joint health is improving. You'll see the improvements on your skin and your nails quicker than with your joints and your bones. It takes longer for those to go through its healing process and remodeling process. But it's a very high quality product, so please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. For the ones that have bought the structural nanosilver liquid, also get a applicator set. This is important because you can have the liquid in these different bottles and just carry it in your bag. You can take it to work. You get a nasal spray, dropper, and a spritzer. The spritzer is great for spraying surfaces if you need to neutralize them or to get the back of your throat. The dropper, you use it, to put it in your mouth, and the nasal spray obviously will help to spray the structural nanosilver in your nostrils. With that said, let's go to Glenn Greenwald and this great nuclear danger discussion that he's having with a professor or a scholar. But again, it's dovetailing into the Ted Kennedy ethos, all right? Why? Because there's a huge arc of service in the Senate during a very pivotal time periods in American history, and that there's something being lost. There's an etiquette being lost. There's an intelligence level that's being lost. There's an art of rhetoric that's being lost. There is a loss of history in the United States. And if we go too far into the ocean and forget where we came from, and we don't find that North Star, we're not going to be able to get back home. And we may actually destroy our home in the process. So it's really important. We're in tumultuous times here. It's not inevitable that it's all going to be Armageddon and scorched earth. But we're moving in that direction, and it's dangerous, and we need to just be wise. We have to be calm and realize that that Americans are failing in many categories, and that if we don't raise the bar in terms of knowledge gain and etiquette and God, country, and family, then we are going to lose. We are going to lose that shiny hill, the city on the shiny, how Reagan said it, the shiny city up on the hill. That's how Reagan phrased it. We'll lose that. Will you lose that blessing? So, pay attention. Social media has destroyed society. It has not helped it. It has destroyed it. There's lots of research that's talking about how intelligence levels are going down because of it. Well, if we have the average intelligence level is going down, our leaders' average intelligence level is going down over time. There's a new generation that's coming in that has been affected by social media. It's just starting into politics. So they're going to lose the history. They're going to lose debate. They're going to lose the concept to sit down and think, ponder. Because really important solutions, really important problems that need really important solutions, it's not a click of a button on a screen. It's not that easy. And there's a lot of people on Twitter and a lot of people on YouTube that think they know it all. They don't. And a lot of them, if you randomly pick, would have lower than average intelligence. Americans need to raise the bar. If someone disagrees with you, if they say something, they disagree, people write comments like retarded comments or evil comments. There's a cognitive dissonance and groupthink, and that's bringing down the intelligence level. It's really, we're moving to the edge of the abyss, and we need to stop the craziness. If we don't, there will be an economy that's destroyed. Security as a nation will be destroyed. Law and order will be destroyed. Opportunity will be destroyed. Was it worth it? No. So heed what I'm saying. Heed the warning. Something bad is coming. It's not inevitable. But if we keep on going in the direction we are, something bad's really going to happen. And then once that does happen, you've lost everything.
Use of atomic weapons when the U.S. dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and one on Nagasaki, Japan, killing an estimated 450,000 people at once. Much of the next 45 years of the Cold War was centrally focused on the question of how the U.S. and the Soviet Union and other nuclear powers could avoid the risk of repetition, the risk of nuclear war in the future, especially as those bombs became more and more destructive. Fear of nuclear war was embedded in the American psyche. Children learned how to hide in bomb shelters in their school, and news was often dominated by discussion of nuclear war dogma and nuclear war agreements. Yet even as the U.S. is now involved in multiple dangerous conflicts around the world involving nuclear armed states, a war with Russia and Ukraine, war in the Middle East, constant provocative acts toward China, obviously nuclear power, it seems that the fear of nuclear war has sometimes almost completely eroded. In fact, at the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, many media articles explicitly insisted that the risk of nuclear war with Russia was vastly overblown, and that we must not let our fears of nuclear weapons and nuclear war paralyze us from pursuing war when necessary. Some even tried to argue that nuclear war could be manageable or even come at an acceptable cost. Professor Nina Tenenwald is a senior lecturer in political science and a director of undergraduate studies in the Department of Political Science at Brown University. Her research is focused on the role of international institutions, norms, and ideas in global security issues, including efforts to control weapons of mass destruction and human rights and the law of war. She's the author of a very relevant book titled The Nuclear Taboo, the United States and the Non-Use of Nuclear Weapons Since 1945, which examines why the world has not used nuclear weapons since 1945 and how we can continue to avoid it. Again, Professor Tenenwald, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm really excited to speak with you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So here we are on the 70th anniversary of the first and only use of nuclear weapons when the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. And one of the primary topics that you try to assess in your book is why it is that the world has not used nuclear weapons since then, even though there are now more nuclear powers. And even though, as you say, sometimes it might even have been rational or strategically in the interest of a country to have used nuclear weapons, none of them have. Can you touch upon some of the reasons why you think nobody has?
Yes, so this is a really interesting puzzle in the history of international relations, because typically when a new weapon is invented, it spreads around and then everybody uses it. And in this case, the US used atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And as you noted in your opening comments, people, military and political leaders after the end of World War II and much of the public fully expected that these weapons would be used again. And they haven't been. And this 79-year tradition of non-use of nuclear weapons is the single most important feature of the nuclear age. Now, why has this happened? So I think there's several pieces to the explanation. One is clearly deterrence, that these are such incredibly destructive weapons that, as we've seen, mutually nuclear armed states become very cautious. They're deterred from getting into a direct conflict or risking escalation to the use of nuclear.
And this is why, even though there's a lot of people that are negative towards Kissinger, and I am one of them, where there was elements of war crime things going on with Cambodia, all right, but he was instrumental with nuclear deterrence, and he was a strategic thinker. He played game theory really well. To say that he wasn't good at that, I mean, you're not paying attention. So there's bad sides to Kissinger and there were good sides to Kissinger. All right. And since his passing, and as he was ailing and as he was getting older, I feel that the United States is kind of moving away from the lessons learned from the Truman and from Truman and Eisenhower and from Kennedy. And it's just kind of like there was something learned there that's lost. It's really important to get that back. And that the anchor of that history of Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy, that anchor was Kissinger. Now Kissinger's gone. We're losing, just like Ted Kennedy was an anchor of ink in the Senate of this larger arc of history. This might be the reason why term limits may not be a good idea in the Senate. You may need historians in the Senate, the older guard, to actually give a context of why things are the way they are. And it doesn't mean they can't be improved, but I think a big problem with what is happening in the United States is we are learning new things and forgetting really important other lessons. Because we're so focused on the day to day. It's very survival oriented, but not looking at the larger arc and how something could emerge that is catastrophic for society and we're not paying attention to. This is the reason why I keep on drumming this idea that there's these key players that have died, that we've lost the anchor, and our leaders are terrible. And what did JFK say? You know, with the military, when it was the chief of staff, you know, they all want to blow everything up. There's nothing, you never find someone that doesn't want to blow something up, and the bigger the bomb, the better in their mind. You know, so and they feel so that they can launch because they are part of the, you know, the surviving government, you know, in some sort of bunker. And they don't care about us because we're just, you know, cannon fodder for their nuclear weapon.
But that's not all of the explanations, because of course nuclear weapons have not been used against non-nuclear states. And so, you know, I began to look into this puzzle because it seemed to me that there was a disconnect between kind of academic theories of deterrence, which are kind of cool, calculating, and rational, and what you see in the historic record from the Cold War, which is leaders, and I looked especially at US leaders, how they thought about using nuclear weapons in a crisis. And a lot of them raised normative and moral concerns and like wondered how many people will be killed if we use nuclear weapons. And so there was this disconnect. And so I began to really research this. And my argument is that, you know, in addition to deterrence, I would argue that what I call a nuclear taboo, a kind of normative inhibition, a norm of non-use has arisen, and it has helped to reinforce the practice of non-use. And this nuclear taboo is arises from the widespread revulsion people feel when, you know, at the prospect of the kind of destruction that nuclear weapons would bring. So it's sort of a normative opprobrium. And so this taboo is kind of developed during the Cold War and after, and now we have this, you know, 79-year tradition of non-use. So, you know, where did this come from? It's partly there was partly due to public opinion and a global grassroots anti-nuclear movement that emerged in the 1950s over the prospect.
I think the professor is missing a big point here. In modern day vernacular, even on the Senate floor, all right, what do? I'm going to nuke that policy, you know, and it's something to do with, you know, kids at playground, you know, funding or something. You know, the use of nuke, or, you know, nuking your opponent, or the battleground states, you know, during an election year. We're using words that are inflammatory, that create division. It's divisive or divisive. And there's this, you know, this overuse of nuke, you know, and it's just, and unfortunately, it's not just, you know, today. I mean, it happened 20 years ago. They were saying this kind of stuff. They were saying this in the 90s. They were even saying in the 80s and in the 70s. So, you know, the thing is that there is this almost laissez-faire attitude towards the word nuke. It's kind of like, you know, cavalier, you know, aspect to it. Oh, you know, you don't like someone, I'm going to nuke you. Now, of course, they don't have a nuke, and you know, they can't nuke them literally, but it's just the use of the word. So when you you know, she's talking about a normative analysis. There's a normalization of the word. There's a normalization of total destruction. That with a population that forgets the lessons learned from the 50s, the 60s, what will happen is that a mistake, a miscalculation will lead to mass destruction. So, you know, even during Truman's time and Eisenhower and Kennedy mentioned this on his tapes. You know, the generals seem to knee-jerk towards nuclear war. They have a bias towards nuclear war because of first strike response, right? Strategy. So, you know, we got to be careful of that. You know, they even back then they weren't really normative. They were talking about who's going to survive the, you know, this nuclear conflict. You had other people in the room that were going like, well, how many people are going to die? Trying to be kind of like rational about the situation. So you had rational actors and quasi-rational actors, meaning, you know, first strike response. You know, we got to hit them now. You know, that's a quasi-rational. It's rational for trying to, you know, to survive a war, but it's not rational because you're starting the war. So, you know, you had two different types of players that were going on back in the 50s and the 60s. That's for sure. And I think she's downplaying the knee-jerk reaction of a first strike response.
Nuclear testing, but then expanded in the 1980s. Again, there was a very large anti-nuclear movement that protested the Reagan administration's warfighting rhetoric. And the effect of the anti-nuclear movement, which has been, you know, grassroots in many countries, but also used the UN and non-nuclear states, has been to stigmatize nuclear weapons, to stigmatize them as unacceptable weapons of mass destruction, that they're inhumane weapons. And so the grassroots anti-nuclear movement has not been successful in achieving disarmament, which was its goal. But what it has been successful at is making it impossible to think about nuclear weapons as just another weapon. And that is the single most important legacy of global grassroots anti-nuclear activity. So I think the sources of the taboo lie both in strategic concerns and self-interest, that is deterrence, but also in normative and moral concerns. And these two things can go together.
So, like most Americans, I was steeped with the indoctrination when I was, a student, that the American use of nuclear weapons was not only strategically justified, but extremely moral as well. And as you know, the argument goes that had we not used nuclear weapons, we would have ended up killing a lot more people in Japan. A lot more Americans would have died. Just on total, there would have been a much bigger loss of life as a result of the non-use of nuclear weapons than there was the use of nuclear weapons. Now, since then, I understood that there's a much more nuanced debate about that topic in the United States and around the world. But I guess my question to you is, if that is true, if, like, let's say a country is certain that it can use nuclear weapons and kill fewer people than a vast war would end up killing without nuclear weapons, what is the moral or ethical consideration that you're alluding to that would deter somebody from using them anyway?
So first, it's a great question. First, on the debate over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I think that is a debate among historians about how much difference nuclear weapons, the use of atomic weapons by the United States, contributed to Japan's decision to surrender. So some argue yes, some argue no, that wasn't the key factor in the Japanese decision to surrender. But in any case, and then there's debates over how many American lives were saved by the US use of atomic weapons. in any case, what's important is what U.S. leaders believed at the time. So, for example, what President Truman believed at the time. And at the time, they did believe that the use of atomic weapons would save a lot of American lives. Today, it's the risk of nuclear weapons is that they are not just conventional weapons, and there's a risk of escalation and a nuclear exchange that would lead to much, much more destruction than even a war with conventional weapons. And so, right, there's this kind of Pandora's box. It's kind of a red line. Once you open that box or you cross that red line to a use of nuclear weapons, you don't know where it will end. So could Russia use a tactical nuclear weapon in the war in Ukraine and it wouldn't escalate to a much larger war? It's possible, but nobody knows the answer to that. And so once you cross that red line, then all bets are off. And you're potentially looking at a war that could have, end life on the planet as we know it. So that's the nuclear weapons are qualitatively different kinds of weapons than conventional weapons, right? And they have, much different kinds of effects, radiation and long-term radioactivity and blast effects and firewall effects and so on. And so potentially if you even engage in what you think is going to be a small nuclear war, you have no ability to control that fundamentally. You have no ability to know for sure that it won't escalate to something very, very large.
So you want, okay, sorry about that. I do want to focus on sort of where we are now with how nuclear weapons are perceived and the risk of nuclear war. But I just want to ask one last question about the decision by President Truman in the United States to use nuclear weapons to end the war. It seems like there have been documents that emerged that they were actually having those moral and ethical debates, not just the strategic debates inside the government. I think there's evidence that President Truman himself and a lot of his top aides were very concerned about, I guess you could say, the legacy effect of being the first ever leaders to use a bomb of this kind. They were insistent on getting real estimates about how many people it would kill. Do you think that those kind of ethical and moral considerations played a significant role in Truman's decision or the United States government's decision to use nuclear weapons 79 years ago?
So no and yes. No, in the sense that there was a lot of momentum toward using the bomb. So the bomb was developed to use on Germany. And when Germany, the war against Germany ended in April, there was this, in April 1945, then there was this kind of just sort of automatic switch to the possibility of using it on Japan. Truman had just come into office. He was a very inexperienced president. The Manhattan Project already had this momentum that he really didn't control. And so there was this kind of automaticity to it. There had been a set of internal debates about what the target should be in Japan, and the Secretary of State at the time raised concerns about dropping a bomb on Kyoto because he'd been there and had a lot of cultural sites, and so he wanted to preserve it. But Truman got kind of caught up in this momentum of the Manhattan Project that was already underway. What we do know is that once the 2 atomic bombs were dropped and they saw what the consequences were, Truman was very upset about this and basically said there will not be any third bomb dropped, that the U.S. would not drop a third weapon, which was in the ready to be dropped. So, and then Truman later wrote about his moral, concerns about this and his kind of agonies and over, how many people might have been killed. And it's not clear he fully understood some of the targets people were talking about, but it's clear that he was concerned about how many people were killed by this in Japan and then did not want a third bomb dropped. So, but on balance, I would say the use of atomic weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki basically was the continuation of immense destruction of civilians caused by conventional weapons and the fire bombings of Tokyo, for example, and Germany. So it sort of continued the level of a kind of destruction that was already well underway by the time we got to August 1945.
I want to look at this issue that you mentioned about deterrence because it's obviously central to nuclear dogma and doctrine. It's clearly been a major reason, as you said, why there hasn't been a further war, namely the United States and then the Soviet Union. Now Russia can easily destroy one another and would do so the minute nuclear weapons were in the air. But there's also this other aspect to this deterrence idea, which namely that countries see that if you have nuclear weapons, it serves as a deterrent against countries attacking you. And if you don't have nuclear weapons, it makes you far more likely to be attacked. We've seen that over and over. I mean, the United States could have attacked Pakistan after 9/11, which I think clearly had more of a relationship to 9/11 than Iraq did, but Pakistan has nuclear weapons and Iraq doesn't, and it was much more easier to invade Iraq. We see the same thing with Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine has no nuclear weapons. If they had nuclear weapons, it would likely change that calculus significantly. Nobody messes with North Korea because they have a stockpile of nuclear weapons that people genuinely fear. So do you think that this deterrence, while on the one hand kind of keeping the peace, is on the other incentivizing every rational country because they're thinking, well, you don't have nuclear weapons. We're the countries that get attacked. You see that now with Israel and Iran. Iran clearly feels obligated to attack back, but they're petrified that they don't have nuclear weapons and Israel does. And I think the calculus would be much different if Iran did on both sides. So how do you see that kind of work motivation that nuclear weapons are creating?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Well, that's the whole idea of nuclear proliferation.
And I think that some countries look at Ukraine's situation and say, well, if Ukraine had nuclear weapons, it wouldn't be in the position that it's in. For a bunch of reasons, which I won't go into, it would have been impossible for Ukraine to keep its nuclear weapons. But I think the larger issue here is, what are the advantages and disadvantages or the risks and costs of deterrence? So deterrence does work, right? At some level, deterrence does work, and it probably where it works best is preventing an attack on your homeland if you have nuclear weapons. But it's like it won't always work, and the costs, the risks and costs of deterrence are very high. And again, we just have to look at the Ukraine war, where deterrence does seem to be working on both sides. So, the West and the US have deterred from more aggressive support of Ukraine, and Russia so far is deterred from expanding the war to other NATO countries, say Poland and Romania. But what happens if Russia decides to kind of take a little nip into Poland, the little nickel and dime kind of actions? How do you respond to that? And as these kinds of little nickel and dime aggressions ratchet up, at what point do you risk getting into nuclear war through miscalculation or misperception, which is probably the most likely way we would get into nuclear war. So, I do think deterrence works at a minimal level, but I think the costs and risks of it are extremely high, and it's unlikely to work forever. There's going to be a moment when it doesn't work, and then what happens? And that's why I think we need to be moving over time to reducing the role of nuclear weapons and moving toward a world of many fewer nuclear weapons, ultimately perhaps some disarmed world or something close to that. But even with nuclear deterrence, especially at the beginning of the Ukraine war, I mean, people were not sleeping well at night, even under the nuclear umbrella, because it doesn't guarantee that Russia won't attack another NATO country in some way. And I think it's the costs, right? Nuclear deterrence is useful for a very small number of things with very significant risks and costs.
I want to ask you, I will say proudly that I'm not old enough to have lived through the kind of peak of the Cold War where fears of nuclear war were at their peak, but I certainly read about those times. My parents often talked about them. I mean, it really was. It was like front and center. The risk, the fear of nuclear war was dominant in the culture. It was dominant in the politics, as I alluded to. Children lived in, would practice in bomb shelters, and obviously that generation remembers the use of nuclear weapons. They lived through the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Obviously, since we're at the 70th anniversary, most Americans now have not. And at the same time, it's not that we don't really talk about nuclear war much anymore, but as I alluded to, at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, there were articles in journals like The Atlantic and other sort of Brookings Institution, articles explicitly talking about whether fears of nuclear war are overblown, whether they're, I mean, that kind of thing seems like unimaginable to me that would have been talked about openly in the 50s and 60s. Like, who cares? Like, we can manage a nuclear war, or we're being too concerned about it. Do you think there has been this kind of erosion, unhealthy erosion of fear of nuclear weapons and in a dangerous way?
Absolutely. I think there's a kind of what I would call a nuclear forgetting, that we have a kind of collective amnesia about the consequences and risks of nuclear war. So the fall of September 2022, so after the Ukraine war had begun and Russia was making a lot of nuclear threats like every other day, I mean, that was the first moment in my entire professional career of thinking and writing about nuclear weapons that I actually thought a nuclear weapon might get used. And I've never felt that before. That immediate that sense of immediate risk, like we're not, we're 1 or 2 or 3 decisions away from a use of nuclear weapons, that subsided somewhat. But now I think we are today in the most dangerous period of nuclear danger than we have been in since probably the early 1980s. So we have the Russia-Ukraine conflict and all the nuclear threats that Russia has been making, and we have the complete dismantlement of the arms control framework, the U.S.-Russia arms control framework, which has helped to stabilize the nuclear relationship, provide channels of communication, and establish shared understanding. So what we have left is, in 2018, Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal. In 2019, the U.S. pulled out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which prohibited the kind of medium range missiles in Europe because they have such a short flight time, so they're very destabilizing. And then in 2020, the U.S. and Russia pulled out of what's called the Open Skies Treaty, which was a surveillance treaty. All we have left now is one treaty. It's the New START Treaty. And when it expires in 2026, I doubt there will be a replacement negotiated. And which means that for the first time since 1972, there will be.
This is the reason why, this is what I've been saying. And this part of the video I haven't seen, so you're just getting off the cuff response from me. This is why I keep on saying we need to learn from the Truman, the Eisenhower, and the Kennedy years about how this is evolving, all right? And we're kind of forgetting, and there's a larger administrative state that's pushing the strings here. But there's also a tendency in the media and even in academia to kind of, and she hasn't said it yet, maybe she won't, but it was just over the bow, right? A Trump administration is causing this. This has been this has been working in its process with even larger weapons of mass destruction and some sort of shield development during the Bush Jr. years administration. So, the 43rd president of the United States, it's miscalculation with 41, the president, that's Bush Sr., with invading Iraq and not really paying attention to Russia and just letting the NATO to expand. but I am concerned on how academia and liberal media has a tendency to spin these things that it's Trump's fault. You know, during the early days of Trump's administration, and even during the first election cycle for the general election in 2016, you had professors that were psychologists that were saying, well, Trump's just a psychopath and he's going to launch a nuclear weapon and all this stuff. They're crickets about the mental incapacity of Biden and his administration being inept. And the worry is more under Biden than under Trump. Now, that worry in Biden's administration may carry into a new Trump administration. Who knows? You know, there may be some momentum with this, and it leads to nuclear war. But you got to be careful on trying to demonize Republicans or Democrats, and we have to be, you know. But there's a tendency in the modern media, you know, the last 6 years or so, to demonize Trump, and he's a nuclear, you know, they did the same thing with Reagan. You know, he's a warmonger, and there's going to be a nuclear war. So the Democrats were demonizing Reagan during the 80s, and now the Democrats are demonizing Trump. Yeah, so you know, we got to be careful with this, right? It's just kind of slightly shot over the bow. You know, she's not as, I've seen worse, but I want to rewind because this is an important point that she's making
here. You know, all the nuclear threats that Russia has been making, and we have the complete dismantlement of the arms control framework, the U.S.-Russia arms control framework, which has helped to stabilize the nuclear relationship, provide channels of communication, and establish shared understanding. So what we have left is, you know, in 2018, Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal. In 2019, the U.S. pulled out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which prohibited the kind of medium range missiles in Europe because they have such a short flight time, so they're very destabilizing. And then in 2020, the U.S. and Russia both pulled out of what's called the Open Skies Treaty, which was a surveillance treaty. All we have left now is one treaty. It's the New START Treaty. And when it expires in 2026, I doubt there will be a replacement negotiated. And which means that for the first time since 1972, there will be no restrictions on the US and Russian nuclear arsenals. That is an unbelievable situation. And now to add to that, we now have, you know, Russia running war games using non-strategic or what are called tactical nuclear weapons for the first time. These are this small.
This is the reason why they need to convince the American public that they need more nuclear power plants.
Nuclear weapons. So in May, it ran these war games with non-strategic nuclear weapons. You know, this is sort of rehearsing for some use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine or against NATO. And all the nuclear armed states are modernizing their nuclear arsenals. The United States will spend $756 billion over the next 10 years to modernize our nuclear arsenal. All of the 9 nuclear armed states are doing this. And so we have this situation of the pursuit of nuclear excess. At the same time, all the arms control agreements, the restraints are being thrown off. And you have sort of some states are changing their nuclear doctrines which suggest that they're lowering the threshold for nuclear use. And as you know, then people are saying, well, you know,
when Kissinger died, I predicted this. That we're going to move towards a more nuclear conflict, more probability of nuclear conflict.
Worry about a use of a nuclear weapon in Ukraine. Putin is bluffing, and I view those those statements as quite cavalier, because I think the risks, again, most likely through escalation or miscalculation, but you can't rule out that if Putin was really pushed into a corner, he might, actively, affirmatively decide to use a nuclear weapon. So this is a moment of really great nuclear danger, and I think we need a lot more education among the American public about the consequences of nuclear weapons and their use.
Yeah, one of the reasons we asked you on was because I find it actually shocking how little discussion there is of these kinds of issues, given that, as you say, and the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists say, we're actually closer to the risk of nuclear catastrophe than at any point since 1945, including 1962, Cuban Missile Crisis.
Because we are run by a bunch of idiots. Going back to the average intelligence level in the United States now, 98. That's below average. 100 is average. The average person in the United States is below average intelligence. So our leaders are even lesser intelligent than the leaders we've had in the past.
I have a couple other questions for you. I don't want to delve into like the politics of Russiagate or the validity of it or whatever, but one of the things that I was concerned about with the emergence of Russiagate and the kind of narrative that Russia interfered in our 2016 election and kind of meddled in our democracy and the like, and especially this idea that kind of any contacts between the US and the Russians, or American officials and Russian officials, were inherently suspicious in some way, that it kind of contaminated the ability of the United States and Russia to do what they've always done, which is maintain an open line of communication in order to prevent the kind of miscommunication, misperception that might inadvertently trigger a nuclear war, as happened in 1962. Does that concern you? Do you agree that like one of the outcomes of Russiagate, again, regardless of political validity or journalistic validity of it, was that it kind of poisoned relations between the two countries to the point where there's not nearly enough communication between the two?
Yeah, I think it's bigger than Russiagate, though. I mean, relations between the US and Russia took a dive in 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea. And Putin and Obama really disliked each other. And so I would date that, as the starting point of the real decline in US-Russia relations. I mean, Putin is really difficult to deal with. I mean, this is not just a US problem, but Putin is unbelievably difficult to deal with right now. And the Ukraine war has really, basically put an end to US-Russia arms control discussions. I mean, those are just not happening. And, in 2023, Russia essentially pulled out of the kind of communications channels of the New START treaty. And I mean, Russia says it's still adhering to the limits on warheads, but it is not going to engage in the communications channels, which are regular meetings where the two sides got together and talked about their arsenals and their deployments and their tests and so on. So these communications channels are incredibly important. And so Russia, after the Ukraine war, Russia shut that down. And the US and Russia have not held any strategic stability dialogues. So it's not just Russiagate. It's really a broader deterioration of what used to be a cooperative relationship in the nuclear area. Remember, after the end of the Cold War, the Pentagon provided a lot of funding to employ Russian scientists and to help Russia deal with the problem of loose nukes. So there was a lot of collaboration there. That has, of course, all come to an end. And now we have really very few contacts, very little discussion. I think as long as Putin is in office, this is going to be very, very difficult.
So it's usually one of the focal points of your work and your scholarship is this idea that we need to be a lot more steeped in the history of what happened with nuclear weapons and kind of focus a lot more on the danger. And there was this massive, gigantic film about, the Manhattan Project and the like, Oppenheimer, which I would bet educated people not necessarily well or poorly, but just, my guess is that people, in 80% or 90% of people who know about the Manhattan Project know it because of that film. Their understanding of the development of nuclear weapons and the reason they were used come from that film. As a scholar in this field, did you consider that film like reasonably accurate? And do you think its gigantic success was helpful in the cause of having people think more constructively about this problem?
Yes, I do think it was a good film, and I think it was reasonably accurate in the, in terms of the historical figures, the characters, the people in the movie. I mean, there were aspects of Oppenheimer's personal life, maybe that were played up a bit for the romantic drama part, but in terms of the physics, the science, and the politics, it was largely accurate. So I think that movie was an excellent way to educate the public. I'm glad it got a lot of attention. I'm glad a lot of people saw it, and I hope more people will see it. But we need more of that kind of thing.
All right, last question. I've heard Donald Trump many times say, while he was in office and since, he's sort of, a figure who just like blurts things out that other people wouldn't.
Before we go to him bashing Trump, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the lozenges and the drops. I have blueberry drops in 100 count. I have elderberry zinc lozenges in a 21 count. And I have a honey and lemon drops in 100 count. You should stock up. The cold season's coming in the United States. The moment you have an irritation in your throat, you want to get some drops or lozenges and get those secretions so you're neutralizing the pathogens and you're maintaining a mucosal barrier. You're reducing the chances of getting a cold or something even worse. So it's really important to just have this stuff in, ready at your household. Get a couple bags or 3, 4 bags, depending on the size of your household, just so you are ready for the cold season. There is an uptick in some of the pathogens that cause the common cold, all right? And it's important to neutralize early. Why? People would go, well, what, it's just a common cold or the flu or whatever, right? Well, the reason is that it takes about a week to heal, but it takes about a week to get over an infection, bacterial or viral or whatever, all right? Typically, if you're healthy. But at the cellular level, it takes weeks. And if you have a prolonged cough, it takes even longer to heal, to remodel the damage. And if it's really bad, you may actually get fibrosis from it and scarring. But the thing is that it's important to attack it right away. All right. And a lot of people that don't follow kind of this like anti-aging, boost up your immune system protocol, they get sick about 2 or 3 times a year. All right. The ones that are not following my advice. And when they get sick 3 times a year by not following my advice, you're taking almost from the time you are getting sick to actually healing from that infection fully is about 4 weeks, sometimes 5 weeks, depending on the severity of it. Even if it's minor, it's 4 weeks to actually heal the cells and bring down that inflammation, all right? So if you're getting sick 2 or 3 times a year, your body is fighting for 3 months of the year. That's 1/4 of the year. And that's happening year after year after year. Now, do you understand why it's so important to follow the protocol? Because you are cutting at the pass and you're reducing the amount of inflammatory days that your body is in. When you do that, you age slower. People that are chronically sick, they age faster. Why? Because you're constantly inflamed. So this is the reason I keep on telling everybody, follow my protocol and you will age slower by neutralizing pathogens, bringing down the pro-inflammatory cytokines, and bringing down the reactive oxygen species load by taking strong antioxidants. Very simple. You got a lot of people out there that just don't listen. Just don't listen. So please go to my store and get a couple bags of this. Be ready, attack it right away. So you don't have to be waiting 3 or 4 weeks for your body to remodel, even with a minor infection. Now, it's even worse if it's a chronic infection. With chronic infections, it may take 6 months to actually remodel, depending on what is happening and what kind of damage is taking place. It's just like people need to wake up. But you know, when you're talking to, you know, when you have a society, that has average or below average intelligence, a lot of mistakes happen, and it doesn't have to be that way. All you got to do is train yourself. Train yourself to improve your intelligence. Train yourself to get a better body. You know, stop being the American schlub, and that way you actually, you know, are a productive citizen. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the structural nano silver soaps. I have very high quality soaps in different varieties. So go to the store and neutralize those pathogens. Turmeric, really important to bring down inflammation, and it's also an antioxidant. You couple that with ashwagandha that controls blood glucose levels, and it'll bring down that inflammatory response cardiovascularly. This is really important to keep that inflammation down. When you keep that inflammation down, your body is healing, your immune system is boosted up, and you slow down the aging process because you aren't chronically inflamed. Real simple concept. Real simple concept. Vitamin D3, gene expression cofactor, helps to get rid of cells that have been infected through apoptosis, right? D3 helps cells to go into apoptosis if they're infected. Really important during the cold season. Really important during the 2020 crisis. In addition, this will help to absorb calcium. So please go to the store and get the vitamin D3. There are an awful lot of people that don't understand, you know, the benefits of taking vitamin D3 on a regular basis. And I just told you why you should be doing it. Clarity factor, very important to get rid of that brain fog and get those neurons firing consistently throughout the workday, while you're studying, you know, while you're in school, even if you're retired. It's important to keep those neurons firing, right? And they'll have strong neuroplasticity. That means that you'll think faster and you will have better memory, and you're slowing down the neurodegenerative aspects of aging. So please go to the store and get the clarity factor and get those neurons firing. Vitamin C, very important to prevent scurvy, and it helps with your skin. It'll help to improve your skin, and it boosts up your immune system. If you're not feeling well, take a double dose of this. Lignans, extremely important to improve your immune system. It's a powder. You mix it with food or with water or a smoothie or whatever. Take it every day, and it'll also help with your hormonal health. This is for males and females. A lot of people don't understand, and I need to do a video on this, but the endocrine system is disrupted because of our lifestyles. The food we eat, the processed foods that are out there, the air we breathe and the water we drink have problems, and it affects our endocrine system, and you need to stop it. So you have to filter your water. You have to stop eating processed food. Stop eating, you know, fast food. Stop. Most restaurants suck. Most restaurants don't even know how to cook. So, you know, and start eating better. When you do that, you're going to improve your immune system. You're going to reduce the number of microplastics that are going in your body. You're going to reduce the number of PFAS chemicals that are going into your body, and you're going to get healthier. Then you take supplementation like this, and it's going to improve your endocrine system and boost up your immune system. Don't follow what I'm saying, and you're going to grow. You're going to get older faster, and you're going to have ailments. Resveratrol, It's an antioxidant, but it also helps to get rid of senescent cells. Really important, and it works well coupling it with other antioxidants like C60, because it helps to boost up the immune system. Probiotics, really important to be taking. I have a powder form and also a veggie cap form. This one's the veggie cap form. You take it every day, it improves your gut biome, allows you to absorb nutrients better metabolism, reduces, by having a good gut biome, you're going to reduce inflammation in your gut. That's going to help boost up your immune system. You're going to get better communication between your gut and your liver and your gut and your brain. You're going to have better mood. So please go to my store and get the probiotics that I offer. It's either in veggie cap, or I also have a powdered version. Some people prefer the powdered version and just mix it with their food, which is what I do. And other people prefer to take the veggie caps. So go to my store and get the probiotic.
Pour it out, and sometimes it misleads people, and other times it kind of inadvertently enlightens. And he talks a lot about classified briefings he's had about the development and evolution of nuclear weapons and how they're in like kind of a different universe of destruction than even Nagasaki and Hiroshima, which I guess stands to reason that over 75 years the science would get better, the weapons would get more destructive. And he talks about it with what I think is a sort of fear. Like it's hard to read him when he's authentic or theatrical, but it seems like the fear is real in the sense that he saw things in these classified briefings that really alarmed him about what these weapons can do. What is your understanding of how different the weapons are that we have now in our stockpile that China has, that the Russians have, as compared to the ones that were unleashed 79 years ago?
Well, so many weapons are much smaller than the biggest weapons we ever had. I mean, the peak of the arms race was in the late 1970s, early 1980s. And in the 1950s, we had these.
With all due respect, Professor Tannenwald, it's not just the yield, it's also the speed. Things are developing in hypersonic, supersonic. And then it's also autonomous. So there's a lot of layers to this.
City busters, many, megaton city busters. We've moved much toward smaller weapons and more precise weapons, and the so-called tactical nuclear weapons we have are most of them are what's called dial a yield. So you can actually change the explosive power that they release, and some of this is like 0.3 of a kiloton. Hiroshima bomb was 15 kilotons. So we have smaller weapons than that. We also have bigger weapons than Hiroshima. So we have some of both. That's we have the big strategic weapons, and then we have these smaller so-called tactical nuclear weapons. So we have this mix. I do think that the U.S. military over the years has been guided in part by a sense that nuclear weapons are incredibly destructive, and if we could make them less destructive, they would help make deterrence more credible, right? The threat to destroy everything in sight is not a very credible threat, but if you could make the weapons less destructive, then your deterrence threat would be more credible. The irony here, or the
I think that when you lower the yield, there's an increased chance of using it.
paradox here is that if you make your weapons less destructive, then they become more usable, and then you're more likely to reach for them, and that would violate the nuclear taboo, and this sort of non-use norm. So there are these ethical trade-offs that make it difficult. Do you want city busters because you'll never use them, or do you want weapons that are more credible but then makes it more likely you'll use them, easier to reach for? So that's the issue. For Trump, I think if Trump did become the next president, I think he really has very little understanding of non-proliferation, of deterrence, of our alliance relationships. I think that he would just, engage in
nothing bad about Biden. little there, Professor Tenenwald. And I don't know, but I'm sure Glenn won't push back.
An all-out nuclear weapons buildup. I think he wouldn't care at all about any kind of nuclear restraints or arms control agreements. We know from some journalists who've written about him that in 2017, he kept talking about wanting to use a nuclear weapon on North Korea, and his plan was we would use a nuclear weapon on North Korea, what we would blame it on another country, and apparently he was not at all concerned about arguments that using a nuclear weapon would kill a lot of people. So, I worry very much about what will happen to the global nuclear order if Trump becomes president.
No,
Yeah,
let's not worry about nuclear war. Let's not worry about nuclear war, Professor. When we have a brain dead president in the White House right now. No, let's not worry about that. See what I mean? These professors and these journalists, and it doesn't look like he's pushing back. Why, Glenn Greenwald? Why didn't you push back? You want to be an honest journalist? Why don't you bring up the dead brain president that we have named President Biden?
And I think we can take a look at that as well. Well, I'm so glad you came on. I think this issue is of immense importance. It's also a fascinating topic, as you said.
He dropped the ball on this
about usability and destructiveness, and you mentioned this phrase, the nuclear taboo, in your last answer, which happens to be the title of your book, which I really enjoyed, and encourage everybody to read it, kind of delve into this history. Not only why nuclear weapons haven't been used in the last 79 years since we dropped them on Japan, but also why some of those deterrent factors might be eroding. And I really appreciate your coming and on our show, taking the time to talk to us about it on this anniversary of the first use of nuclear weapons.
Thank you.
All right,
Glad to be here.
There's just there's a collective psyche that's like going away. There's a lot of books that have been coming out about nuclear proliferation, nuclear war, and all this stuff. Why? It's almost like a signal, right? I don't know if it's on purpose or it's just some sort of subconscious collective thing that's going on, but something bad is coming. I feel something bad is coming. I don't know exactly what it is, but there's just a collective sense of doom, But the demonization of President Trump, I think, is the wrong way to do it. I mean, if you have a president that is mentally incapacitated, that we have right now, that means that we have a president that doesn't have all of his faculties to be able to navigate through crises that may lead to nuclear exchange. But she didn't bring that up. She didn't bring that up at all. It's demonization of Trump. And Glenn just let it just slide by. I don't know if he's a pro-Trumper or not, but he did not push back. He should have pushed back. It's like, well, wait a minute. Okay, I can concede that there may be concern from your perspective, Professor, with Trump, but don't you think that there's a problem with also brain dead Biden in the White House? Who's running the store? Who has the keys? I think that was poor journalism right there. It's amazing. It's just amazing, how stupid people are. All right, I want to play one more thing. Let's see, maybe. Yeah, let's see here. Trying to find what's going on in the news here. All right, I want to drop into Fox News for a sec here. Trump comes to
So we easily beat crooked Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of our country, and he's the worst because of his policy and other reasons, but because of policy. And now they decided they don't want to go with him, so they say.
Come on. Is this working? There we go.
Let's bring in retired four-star General.
General King. Before we do General King here, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Link is in the description of this video. Please get the good night formula. You need this to get the 3 cycles of REM sleep a night, to be well rested. It's important to get good rest continuously. Why? Through deep sleep and REM cycles, you're going to consolidate memory, you're going to be well rested, and you're going to be detoxifying your body. When you have chronic lack of sleep, what happens is toxins start to build up and you're increasing your chances of disease, like cardiovascular disease and dementia and forgetfulness and lack of energy and all this stuff, and it just compounds. So it's really important to get a good night's sleep. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the good night formula. Magnesium and zinc to help boost up your immune system. Take it every day. If you're not feeling well during the cold season, take a double dose of it. Olive leaf extract, a new product on my store, important for you to take every day. It helps to boost up your immune system, and it helps to improve your cardiovascular system. How does it work? It brings down inflammation, so it's helping with the immune system, but it's also bringing down inflammation in the vascular system that helps with the cardiovascular system. In addition, it brings down LDL and raises HDL levels, so it's helping with your lipid profile. This is a dual product. It's really important to take every day, so take the olive leaf extract, very high quality product. Vitamin B complex, very important for your mitochondrial health and also cellular metabolism. You need really healthy mitochondria to build up all that BTP you need. That helps with your immune system, and it also helps with your brain. People don't realize your neurons have a lot of mitochondria to create these neurotransmitters and to shoot them off. All right. So you need healthy mitochondria in your body, especially in your brain. So go to the store and get the vitamin B complex to get proper cellular metabolism and to improve your mitochondrial health.
In general, I thought by now we'd be talking about the retaliation of Iran and/or Hezbollah. Why haven't we?
Well, first of all, they took about 2 weeks the last time, and they're doing much the same this time. And I think Netanyahu is really inside the head now of the Iranian leadership. I mean, when he killed Hamas's political chief, that was one thing. The location of it was actually more important, because the location was in a high security area in the general vicinity of where many of the elite leaders of Iran have taken up residence. That means this is their primary security zone area by the security services. And Netanyahu penetrated that. And he had to have help to do that, likely from an Iranian resistance group. That message has been sent to the leaders. And what Netanyahu is saying, you come in here and you hurt my civilian population here, I'm going to come back for you. And that has got to be inside their head. And what he's doing in Gaza, he's got his foot on the gas pedal here. He is telling Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Iranian leadership that I'm going to finish this on my terms. And he is completely committed to it. I wish the administration was as committed as he is to the end state of this war. He knows he's got to finish off these thousands of fighters. If he leaves them in place as a result of a permanent ceasefire, Hamas wins, and they just bide their time before they reattack.
Exactly, and that is exactly what happened with these other conflicts throughout 2006, 2000, I think it was 8 and 9, 2016. They just kicked the can down the road. They can't do that. Now, are there crimes against humanity? Are there war crimes being committed by the IDF? In certain cases, yes. Is it systemic? No. Are there crimes being committed, war crimes being committed by Hamas? Yes. Is it systemic? Probably not. You know, like I did a video saying how wrong the IDF, the military in Israel, the military defense force, the Israeli military defense force, the IDF was wrong with how they treated some of their prisoners. It wasn't all their prisoners, and it wasn't all of their prison camps. The question is, how systemic is it, and how far up the chain of command did it go? We don't know. But these soldiers that did these things were wrong. They're war crimes. They need to be held accountable. And if found guilty, they should be shot. Their life should end. That's the idea. You know, the ones that cause these war crimes, they should be eliminated. But that's on both sides. Not just the IDF war crimes, but also the Hamas war crimes. And the problem is that mainstream media is not shining a light. I haven't heard so much about I haven't heard General Keane say anything about the war, and maybe he has, I just haven't seen it. But you know, I haven't seen him say anything about the war crimes by the IDF with this camp, right? What happened was wrong, but we did something very similar during the war in Afghanistan and Iraq with Abu Ghraib. So, you know, war crimes are wrong, and they need to be, these people that are doing it need to be held accountable, and they need to be executed. Now, you know, to say that there's war crimes by Netanyahu at a state level while he's, you know, trying to secure his country, I think it's the wrong policy. The same thing. I don't think it's the Hamas leader, you know, being charged by the ICC or ICJ or whatever it's called, IJC, for war crimes, because he's at a state level. But did some of the Hamas soldiers do war crimes? Of course they have. Same thing, IDF soldiers are doing some war crimes too. And those types of war crimes need to be held. These things have to be held accountable, and through some sort of court of justice, you know, if found guilty, they need to be executed. But that's on both sides. To say that it's only happening, war crimes are only happening by the Israeli side is wrong. It's also happening by the Hamas side. How much are the Palestinians involved? Most Palestinians are not involved in this. Some are. Some. It's not systemic. So the international community thinks all war is a war crime. That's wrong. And that, you know, the one that's, you know, causing the most damage must be the war criminal. That's their mentality, you know. But that's my take on it. You can disagree with me, you know, or not. It doesn't really matter. But the thing is here is that there were war crimes done by certain IDF soldiers at certain prison camps, and that was wrong. And there needs to be an investigation, and these individuals need to be held accountable. What adds to this is that there's a right wing that is promoting this kind of behavior, and that is wrong also. You know, it just. But again, war brings the worst out of mankind. All wars have this problem. All wars cause war crimes on all sides. No one's lily white in that regard. With that said, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the extra virgin olive oil C60. It's a very strong antioxidant. I also have it in avocado oil and also in MCT coconut oil. What you do is you take a teaspoon of this a day, and they'll soak up the free radicals that are in your cells, neutralize them, right? They'll neutralize those free radicals and it'll reduce the cellular stress. It'll increase your mitochondrial health and your ATP will increase. A lot of people don't realize that as we age, we build up more and more oxidative stress. If you take a very strong antioxidant every day, you're soaking up those free radicals and you're reducing the stress on the cell and you're slowing down the aging process. That's one major pillar on why you age. There's others, but that's one major pillar. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the C60 either in avocado, coconut oil, or in extra virgin olive oil. It's a very strong antioxidant. Take it on an empty stomach for better absorption. If you're working out, take it before your workout and you'll recover quicker. Multivitamin, very important to take. This is an easy to digest multivitamin. Take this every day, add it to your daily routine. Get it from my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Why do you need to take a multivitamin? Multivitamins are cofactors for enzymatic activity. If you don't have the proper vitamins or a low concentration of them, then your cells won't perform as well. So it's really important, especially when you get older, to take a multivitamin. So please go to my store and get this multivitamin.
Just arrived right there in the Middle East. What's that symbolic of? And number two is, are we ever going to answer for the attack at our base in Iraq?
Well, you would have thought we would have answered by now.
Yeah.
But after all, we're wringing our hands about not wanting to escalate.
We got dead brain Biden. Dead brain Biden in the White House.
Did they escalate? Of course they did. And that's where we have been. Much more on defense than we should be on offense. And hands off Iran in terms of U.S. direct attacks for sure, despite all of the requests being made by our military commanders. Likely not to happen here. But look, credit the administration here. We have got a very effective commander in charge of the U.S.-led coalition, General Cottrell, and they have given him additional resources to make certain that we're able to intercept as much as possible the Iranian attack by drones as well as missiles. So the F-22, that's a major interceptor for the U.S. The Brits, the French will likely be flying as well, the Jordanians, all of that coordinated by General Cottrell's headquarters, and also naval war combat ships with major interceptors on them have been added to the fray here. So the U.S.-led coalition will clearly play a role in Iran's retaliation attack, depending on the scale of it, certainly.
General, people just should understand how this ends has everything to do with if it starts up again. Everybody wants the hostages out, but if you leave Hamas intact, it's only going to be worse the next time. And if you read the Institute for the Study of War that you put out every day, it reveals what is really going on. General, thanks so much. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, you guys do too. Thank you.
I'm Steve Ducey.
This one is about some ambush. Even the commercials just show how stupid Americans are. God, it's just amazing how everything is just so devolving. All right, so
Authorities in
this right
Ukraine's
here, this video here just was published as I'm recording this on August 9th. Russian column purportedly ambushed in surprise Ukrainian incursion in Kursk region.
Well, still not commenting. It's day 4 of an incursion into the Russian border province of Kursk. Russian social media is alight. The Reuters news agency confirming verification for images that show the destruction of an entire Russian column of 12 trucks ambushed in the Reelsky district of Kursk. Emmanuel Shaz reports from the Eastern Front and the town of Pokrovsk.
With Russia declaring the federal state of emergency, we can see just how chaotic is the situation in Russia. We know that fighting continues in Kursk region from the Russian side, on Russian television channels, on information channels also, and on social media. Here in Ukraine, there's still operational silence. There's no information filtrating on the fighting itself. We had comments earlier from the advisor to the presidency, Mikhailo Podolyak, talking about the end of impunity for Russia with this war coming back to its own territory. And Volodymyr Zelensky was mentioning Russia that, according to him, needed to feel what it was doing to Ukraine. Strategically, we have mentioned earlier that one of the reasons for those incursions could be to try and force Russia to move troops from the Eastern Front towards Kursk region to respond to that Ukrainian incursion. I am presently in Pokrovsk. It's one of the cities that is most under pressure here near the front line, because this front line is coming closer every day, because Russia has thrown in a lot of troops in the Pokrovsk direction, because this is one of its main objectives in the west. Here, air raid alerts continue, bombing continue. Just nearby in the city of Konstantinivka, earlier today, a supermarket was bombed. There's already scores of people who have been found injured. There's also many deaths. So here on the Eastern Front, we do not notice yet whether or not those incursions aimed at diverting the Russian army from the Eastern Front as one of its objectives. We do not note any difference. It is everyday war here in the eastern part of Ukraine.
All right. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. The world's going to hell in a handbasket. We might even have nuclear war in a few days. Who knows? People might have cardiovascular problems. So please go to my store at the-studio-reykjavik.com and get the omega-3. Why? Because it helps bring down your LDL, brings up your HDL, and improves your cardiovascular health. So please go to my store and get the omega-3. It also prevents the red blood cells from sticking, so it reduces clotting. Why is that important? Well, there's a lot of clotting problems since 2020. I've partnered up with Rainbow Herbals, and we've created these deodorant bars, these all-natural deodorant bars in citrus and in peppermint lavender tea tree. These are made from essential oils from the Himalayas. It has no aluminum and it has no baking soda in it. So please go to the store. This is a dual product where you're using it as a deodorant, but slowly you're detoxifying your body. So it's really important to use every day. Get a couple bars for your household. It's for males and females. the-studio-reykjavik.com. And lastly, we have developed a skincare bar, right? And it's called the Even Better Bar, also made from essential oils from the Himalayas. You're going to put this bar on your skin every day or every third day, whatever, and you'll notice that your skin is softer and smoother. It has a little bit of a glow to it. In addition, you can use it as a wound care. You can put it on a wound or an abrasion, minor burn, and it'll heal quicker. You can also put it on acne. You'll also see some relief from eczema and psoriasis. So rub it on there. If you have a bug bite, that itching, and you want to stop the itching, put it on the bug bite and it'll stop the itching. If you have a muscle pain, rub it on the muscle. And you'll notice in 30 to 60 seconds that the pain is radically diminished or completely eliminated, depending on the severity of the pain. It's a very high quality bar. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get this everything bar, or Even Better Bar. And this Even Better Bar should be in your medicine cabinet, just ready to go, especially if you have kids, because they're always nicking their legs or getting bug bites or whatever. And, you know, if you want it as a skincare, it's a very high quality skincare bar. So please go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and use it as a utility bar or an anti-aging skincare routine for you. Thank you for listening to the broadcast here. Please share the links. Please ask your social media to follow me. I greatly appreciate it. I have 4 YouTube channels. Links are in the description. I also have Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. Please follow me on all 7 channels. That way you get some sort of notification somehow, some way. You can also follow me on X and GETTR to make sure you get notifications on my work. I have some unique perspectives that I think are important for you to learn. In addition, if you follow what I've been doing for decades about improving your health, then you're going to be able to benefit from the knowledge that I have to slow down the aging process, to boost up your immune system, and for you to have more vitality. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Thank you for listening, and have a nice day.